Hello and welcome to another episode of Coffee with the Chiropractor. It's your host, Patrick Hogg, and we're going to go over all the way to Scotland today. We're going just outside of Edinburgh. Actually, can you just tell us exactly where your practice is?
Yeah, we're in the Scottish borders, about 40 miles south of Edinburgh, between Edinburgh and the English border.
Amazing, amazing. Well, Don, can you just tell me where you're actually from originally? Is it Zimbabwe, if I remember that correctly?
Yeah, I'm born in Zimbabwe.
So he's come all the way over from Zimbabwe to actually spread his magic hands across his patients. And actually, he is one of those guys that I met, I think it must have been about three or 4 years ago. I met him at a conference and he just made himself very vulnerable in the middle of a crowd. And he let the gentleman on the stage really pick him to pieces, but he stood his ground. And actually, I have to admit, I really admired him for what he actually did that day. And he's one of these people he's a chiropractic mentor. He has got an associate-based practice. He's got 3 associates that are currently working with him. But he's one of those people that if you ever reached out to him and asked him for help, he would always want to help. Now, one of the other things I also admire a lot about Donald is his exceptional ability to handle incredibly complicated cases where a lot of people would actually turn their back. And so he's worked with some absolutely incredible people. He's worked with some absolutely incredible cases. And really, he dives very deep into the neurology of patients. In fact, he's actually worked with, I forget, was Doddy, he was part of
Doddy
the
Weirs.
Welsh team. Is that correct? Or was it
No,
Scottish?
he was a Scotland rugby player and a British Lion.
There you go. So he's worked with Doddy Weir, and you've worked with him for nearly 3 years now?
3 years, yeah. It'll in August, beginning of August 6th, it'll be 3 years.
Amazing. And so, look, I'm going to let Donald introduce himself a little bit better, because I know for a fact there will be so many things. Now, this is going to be a dangerous conversation because I know one thing about me and Donald is we can both talk. We can both talk. And so my next guest today is Donald Francis, and I've been super excited about this podcast.
Thanks, Patrick. It's lovely for you to have me. I'm really delighted, actually. And I love talking about chiropractic particularly. So you get me on my favorite subject, you're away.
Amazing. So, Donald, can you just cover any bits that maybe I've missed, maybe a little bit about how long you've been practice and maybe
Sure.
some of the ways that you practice and how you got into it?
Okay, so I'm a second career guy. I went to Palmer College when I was 32. And between 17 and 32, I spent 15 happy years in the British Army. And, like everything, I would love the British Army until one day I didn't. And fortuitously, the very day I decided to leave, my very good friend and mentor, Dr. John Howard, of SOT fame, phoned me up and said, "What the hell are you still doing in the Army?" And back in 2004, I used up a whole month's worth of dial-up internet as I looked around chiropractic colleges that day. And I picked on Palmer. And then 3 weeks later, I was sent to Iraq, which was very exciting. Don't judge me, please. I actually quite enjoyed it. I got a lot out of it personally and put a lot into it. And, I thought whilst I would probably argue we did the wrong thing, at the time I thought it was okay. Then I graduated from Palmer in 2009 and opened up my practice in the Scottish borders as a 36-year-old. So, and I've just been in practice just short of 11 years. So I guess I'm probably, from a technique perspective, most known as an SOT practitioner, but I don't want to be put into a box as an SOT chiropractor because I really think of myself as a chiropractor. I still use upper cervical specific toggle. I still adjust a cervical in a chair like I was taught at Gonstead class. I still side posture. I use drops when I need to, but all my thought process lines up within SOT thinking. I'm subsequently become a qualified craniopath, which is an SOT qualification. It's the highest level you can get in SOT. Takes a few years and a few stabs to get that. And I teach on behalf of SOTO Europe, around Europe. I teach seminars and technique, and I also teach adjusting seminars, because one thing I found alarming when I was interviewing some chiropractors for jobs, that they were actually very scared about adjusting, and not that they're badly taught, they just weren't, the adjustment wasn't framed in a way that I think they were able to utilize to their best advantage. You know, an example, one of my students on one of my own seminars hadn't actually adjusted an atlas since graduating. So there you go. So that's in a, so we run a referral-based practice. We've got 4 associates. We had 4 associates, got 3 associates now. And I quite like that. I see 1 new patient a week, which is, and I see 1 new patient a week because I like to see 1 new patient a week, because I like new patients. So other than that, I'm in a very happy place where I don't really need new patients, which is it's a very relaxing place to be in practice, actually.
That's brilliant. So look, I wanted to dive a little bit deeper with you, because a lot of the conversations we've had with other chiropractors have obviously been surrounding how we can look after ourselves, et cetera, and sleep, and, you know, a lot of the stuff that people will generally know already. But something, like I said, that I admired about you earlier is your ability to understand the neurology, but also make it very simple for other people. Now, I wanted to take this podcast in the direction of really kind of talking about chiropractic and the neurology. And maybe you could just describe some of the cases that you personally work with, so that people can actually understand maybe what chiropractic can help beyond neck and back pain.
Okay. Let's just simplify neurology down to what it really is. Okay. I agree completely that if I touch my nose there, my hand knows where it is, my nose can feel me touching it, and there is some sensory input. So we're going to have our safety pin cycle, we have a sensory up, we're going to have a motor down. But when I move my hand to my nose, what I'm actually invoking is a set of learned programs. That is all we are. If I blink, 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 those are just a set of learned programs. When you hear me speak, you hear me speak with a sort of pseudo-British accent, but you can hear my Zimbabwean tone underneath. And when I'm a little bit drunk or tired or super stressed, you might hear a much stronger, faster accent coming out with a lot more clip, okay? So what those are all are programs. And what you can see by my accent change is that my programs have morphed over time. Now, when I turn my head from side to side, I'm just using the cervical spine as a very simple example. As I move 7 vertebrae and 7 sets of vertebral joints, what you're finding is each one of those movements is a learned program. Now, at some point in life, our body has to adapt to stress. And stress simply is anything that our body has to adapt to. So if we have to adapt to stress, stress is anything we have to adapt to. So an example of that, 2 major stresses that we can't ever avoid is that every single day of our life, we have to stand up against gravity. And the second one is we're always moving towards the end of life. So no matter how well we stand up against gravity and how well we do that will have an extraordinary effect on how well we go through life. And if that's the only reason people come to the chiropractor, that's a good one, because if you can fight gravity better, you're going to live a better life. That is just. So what happens is we have a set of programs. And as I've explained with my accent, those programs morph over time. Now, if I sit like this on a computer and over months, if not years, the programs that run my cervical spine have some interferences in them which stop them functioning properly. Perhaps some of the extensors are inhibited and some of the flexors are stretched. Some of the extensors are super short and but that, a physiotherapist would understand that. Now, where does a chiropractor come in? Well, first and foremost, if those programs stop working and our brain therefore gets out of the habit, that's really key, of firing those programs not only correctly but also in the correct sequence, we end up with those joints not functioning properly. And eventually that will lead to stasis. And eventually that stasis will lead to something which I'm happy calling subluxation, because I went to Palmer, but you call it whatever you like. Okay. Now, that stasis, that neurological dysfunction of the joint is in effect that joint not registering in the thalamus and the cerebellum properly. If it doesn't register properly in the thalamus and the cerebellum, the brain isn't going to engage it properly. And effectively, it's like a spiral. The joint stops working, so it stops reporting up here, so the brain stops using it properly, so it goes on further. When you adjust a joint, any joint in the body, you send, regardless if it's the right joint, by the way, you send a very sharp, very well understood message straight into the brain. Now, if it's a joint, let's just hypothesize C5, C6 in the cervical spine, and your brain hasn't been using that joint for a very long time, and you give it an adjustment, you're going to wake up all sorts of programs in your body, and you're going to say, hey, brain, C5 and C6 here, you've not been firing them, and all of a sudden you're going to wake it up. But because for the previous 10 months, 10 years or whatever, the brain hasn't been engaging that bit of neurology, what you'll find is quite quickly it'll go back to sleeping. So you need to wake it up repetitively, because you've got to relearn the programs that your body's forgotten about. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that's a local case. So if you're in a more pain-orientated practice, you might focus on an area of pain and look at the specifics of a joint. And that's great. I, however, like to see a lot of complex neurological problems. I like motor neuron disease. I like multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's. I've got a lovely young girl of 7 who was almost completely paralyzed before she came. And we've had some almost miracle-like, miracle-sounding results. The reason I think we get these really good results is we look at the person as a whole, the whole person, not just as a set of 24 moving vertebral joints with a pelvis. What this means is when, now this is my neurology, this is not neurology that this is what this is my understanding of it based on my work. This is not necessarily out of a textbook or something I've learned from everybody else. What seems to happen is our whole body actually gets slightly thrown off. For proof of this, just get anybody to stand in front of you and measure the angle, measure the line across their shoulders, measure the line across their ears, and measure the line across their hips, and be very accurate in it. And you will find that almost everybody is imbalanced. What happens is our body ends up in a 3-dimensional spiral. And it does this, the more we're adapting to stress, the bigger the spiral. The less we're adapting to stress, the less of the spiral. Now, my current understanding of this is that when we're in the spiral, our brain has lost its locus. Now, what do I mean by that? The brain has lost its absolute understanding about where the body is within time and space. Now, I get it. My proprioceptors are still firing. Now, if my hand is here, in some form of innate understanding, my brain has a coordinate system, whatever it uses to work out that my hand is exactly there. And if I close my eyes, they should just meet. I just missed it. Must be subluxated.
I was gonna say, you need to get adjusted.
I do. This COVID is killing me. Should see my chiropractor tomorrow. So when we adjust, so what I'm thinking of there is more of an atlas adjustment, or using my SOT world of bringing of the top and the bottom together. I'm putting this word as you align the spine, what you do is you bring the brain back onto center. Now, if the brain is back on center, we have to understand that in principle, by principle, we are designed to heal. In fact, if you had a wound on your leg, a cut, even if it was quite a wide cut, you would have to go to extraordinary lengths to stop that wound from healing. Extraordinary lengths to stop that wound from healing. And so we're designed to heal. And if we can reorientate our brain and body together, our body has a really good chance of healing. And so with the motor neuron, we have to be very careful as chiropractors. The first and foremost thing is I do not treat motor neuron disease. I do not treat Parkinson's. I do not treat multiple sclerosis.
Agreed.
I do not treat paralysis, okay?
Mm-hmm.
All I do is treat people, and those people quite often have some neurological problems. And if you can accept as a fundamental basis that when we adjust somebody, we are waking up neurology, and that if the brain can now re-engage with more purposeful neurology, the body will be better. So I'm aware I've spoken solidly there for about 5 minutes, but there is chiropractic 101, I think. Philosophically, I'm perfectly at home with words like universal intelligence and innate intelligence, but I don't use them often with my patients. I find that sometimes that's a bridge a little bit too far to cross.
It gets a little bit complicated, and I think a few people maybe find it a little bit woo-woo. Just the stigma. It's just the stigma that surrounds it.
I agree. But you know what? Actually, within chiropractic, there is we have far more in common than we have apart. We like the adjustment. I am a very straight chiropractor. I don't sell pills. Actually, we do. We've got some vitamin D. We sell some vitamin D purely because you can't buy it where we live, and I think it's good for you. But other than that, we don't sell anything else but chiropractic, not acupuncture, not massage therapy. We just straight chiropractic. The reason for that is I don't think there's any harm. In fact, I like acupuncture and I like having a massage and stuff, but they're not chiropractic. So I don't want people getting remotely confused about why they're at the chiropractor. They're at the chiropractor for chiropractic. If I think a massage would do them some good, I know lots of massage therapists and I'll refer them, got an acupuncturist who's a friend, they can go there. But I'm straight chiropractic.
Yeah, I agree that it can sometimes become very complicated when you mix the message, and actually sometimes it is easier to keep it straight. I have to admit, I'm on the more of the opposite end of the spectrum, but I took over a practice that was already integrated, it was already mixed, and so
there's no judgment there at all.
No, absolutely not.
I just think we all do what our values are, and our values come out of our experience. So whatever we've experienced, whatever's worked for us, and in terms of values and chiropractic and whatever, 10 years ago, I graduated from Palmer, the fountainhead, but I lacked certainty, and I tried to ally myself as much as possible to what people would understand. Yeah, I can do that. I understand physiotherapy. Yeah, I can do that. I understand muscle pain and stuff like that. But as I've gained greater success with chiropractic, my certainty's grown. And because my certainty's grown, and my understanding has grown with what I do, I am really confident. And I'm one of those nerds that can look at somebody before I've even touched them and be fairly sure what I'm going to do to them and how they're going to react. So I love it. And I think in chiropractic, I think we all need to live and let live. What I do works, and I know, Patrick, we had a discussion before, you've got a really busy practice, and what you do works too. Just because what I do is different to what you do, they both work, and I think we need to be a lot respectful of that.
And I have to admit, I'm very similar to you. I've done a little bit of SOT. I'm not quite to the same level. I've done a lot of Thompson technique. I've done a little bit of activator, and I'm the same as you. I use different things for different people. I adjust what I feel like needs adjusting. I use a lot of the Thompson listings, but I don't necessarily always adjust Thompson drop style.
Oh, so I understand that. I think what a lot of chiropractors, so it's quite difficult to put within the frame of a podcast necessarily, but I know when a patient gets off the table whether they're at ease or not at ease. Okay, and I know that regardless of how much pain they're in or what they came in for, I know when they're at ease or not at ease, and I've got various parameters to understand that. But that, as a very base level, are the shoulders level, are the ears level, and are the pelvis level? Okay.
They talk a lot about that in Carrick as well. That
yeah.
It was actually interesting that the point that you said earlier about the spiral, Carrick Institute looks at that quite a lot as almost that kind of torque-based thing, with the shoulder dropping forward on one side and the hip rolling out on the other. And so that's actually something that, because we use posture screen in our clinic, so it's one of our outcome measures for seeing and communicating those neurological changes that change in the tone of certain neurons going to certain muscles. And we use it as similar to what you were saying earlier. We use the structure to almost communicate the function of the nerve system and how actually we can start to see the dysfunctions or the changes in tone.
Oh, I'd be really interested to do some Carrick, actually. I was having finished my cranial exam, but I believe I understand why the twist happens. In fact, I'm fairly sure, but I'm not going to say it because there's so much. Chiropractic is so full of judgment. If I say something, no, it's not. That's not what I see. So I believe I understand it. When I have enough, I believe I understand it, and I will discuss it in private with somebody. But when I've got enough information, I will try and tell the world why I believe it happens. And I would refer anybody to the work of Dr. John Howard in Oxford. He's got a new cranial principle, and it's changed. Dr. John Howard, that's craniofacial dynamics. And once I really understood that, it changed my practice. Now, I use SOT, but I actually, if I was required to, I could do an amazing SOT adjustment in about 90 seconds, actually. People might disagree with me, but the principle is there, because we're just changing the neurology back to the brain, and that is it. There's no time. People get very fixated on the do. So I'm very much into a principle you may have heard of called be, do, have. Be, do, have, and drawn out. Be, do, have means it's who you are that determines how well what you do works, and therefore what you have. So you can have two chiropractors, both going to AECC, both attend the same seminars, both work in the same clinic, and they'll get alarmingly different results in numbers, in outcome measures, in finances, and everything. And the big difference there is the B part. It's who you are. So people are really fixed in our profession on the do. What is it you do? And well, the answer is I do chiropractic. And why are your results so good? Because I honestly believe this. It's because I am a chiropractor. I think chiropractic. I live chiropractic. My oldest son went to a general practitioner for the first time at 13. Not because we're weird, wacky parents, because he just was never sick enough to go to the doctor. My daughter broke her arm, so my daughter appears on the medical records of Scotland twice. She was born, that initiated a hospital visit, and she broke her scaphoid in a skateboarding accident when she was about 11. Those are her two appearances. So, I live as a chiropractor. I absolutely live my message.
It was funny. It's funny you should say about how often you guys go to the medical doctor, because actually, funny enough, when I applied for my mortgage this year, I realized that the last time that I went to go and see my medical practitioner was to get my fitness to practice license. And prior to that, I think it was about another 5 years prior to that, which was that was as I started university. And do you know what? We started adjusting each other when we in year 2, and I kept getting chronic tonsillitis. We were adjusting each other really, really badly at school, and I'd never ever got sick like that before. And it was in my second year at chiropractic school, and I just kept getting tonsillitis. I'd shake it and it would come back, and I'd shake it and it would come back, and I'd shake it and it would come back. But I did refuse to get my tonsils removed.
Okay. Mine were removed for me when actually, there's a story, and the reason my first chiropractic adjustment was given to me in 1977 on a sofa in Salisbury, Rhodesia, which is now Harare, Zimbabwe. And the reason was, and the irony of this just knocks me in the nuts every day. I couldn't have my tonsils out because we lived out in the middle of the bush, and I couldn't get healthy enough to go into hospital to have my tonsils out. So I went to the chiropractor, and after being adjusted, I was then healthy enough for long enough to have my tonsils taken out. And the fact that never really, it never measured on us as a family, that all we had to do really was go to the chiropractor.
Yeah, I did a podcast with a gentleman called Keith Wasson, who was in a very similar position where, honest to God, like the guy couldn't have been any sicker if he tried. And he was in a supermarket with someone, it was a shopping mall somewhere, and someone recommended a chiropractor to him. And he was like, no, I think he said his dad was a medical doctor. And he was like, no, I'm just not doing it. It's not happening. And his friend was like, well, look, what have you got to lose? And now he was given 3 months to live, and he didn't have a family, he didn't have kids. And now he's got something like 6 kids. He's been married for 20 years, and he's teaching people all across the world about chiropractic, because similar kind of scenarios.
He's a great advocate, Keith, actually. He produces some really good content for use on social media.
Yeah, he's amazing. So look, Donald, I'm very aware of your time, and so I would love to ask you just a couple more questions, which is, look, if someone's maybe in a little bit of trouble, maybe they've got some like serious neurological conditions, what kind of advice could you give someone in that kind of position, maybe to improve or actually sustain what's going on without actually letting things get obviously significantly worse?
Okay. So if they've got serious neurological conditions and they're not seeing a chiropractor, okay, let's assume they're out there in life, is the honest answer is reduce your requirement for your body to adapt to stress. Just eat as close to what you understand human beings should eat as possible. Move if you can. Even if it's a little bit painful and you're not making it worse, move, because movement is the brain's food. Without movement, our brain goes to sleep. So you have got to move. Reduce your chemical stress, reduce your physical stress, and reduce your medical stress. Reduce your mental stress. Learn to meditate. Learn to do something that's going to take you away from that sympathetic fight or flight state. So the first thing is, chiropractic helps your body in its adaptation to stress. Stress is anything we have to adapt to. So D.D. Palmer called it thoughts, emotional stress, trauma, physical stress, or toxins, 3 T's. But you could easily just say emotional stress, physical stress, and chemical stress. So if you are ill, if you've got COVID-19, if you've got whatever you've got in life or whatever you want to avoid, reduce your body's requirement to have to adapt to those stresses, okay? If you can't move your legs and your arms, move your spine. The spine sends about 80% of all the neurological brain food that the brain needs from the body. What I mean by that is the sensation of movement. About 80% of what the brain needs comes from the spine. And if you really want to know, about 80% of what the spine sends comes from the neck, because it's the bendiest part that keeps our massive brain on top. So it's not avoiding the stress. I like a bit of stress. It's avoiding making your body have to adapt to it. That's the key.
That's really interesting. That's really interesting, actually. And it was interesting what you were saying about the neck as well, because obviously sacro-occipital techniques, obviously very much looking at the very top of the neck and the base of the spine, which, funny enough, are really the two areas where you get a lot of the foundation of strength from for your spine. So it's actually, you are practicing what you preach. And also something really the other interesting thing you said is if you're not seeing a chiropractor, these are some of the things. But obviously both of us sitting here are going to recommend that if there is something neurological going on, these are great ways that you can reduce your deterioration. But actually, interestingly enough, am I allowed to talk about Doddy a little bit?
Yeah, I'd love to. He's great. He's very on message with
Fine. So I remember when you obviously first started seeing Doddy, his biceps and stuff were all going weak, and there was, and you said earlier before we jumped onto the call that he was actually given about a year.
Yeah, he's yeah, he was given about a year to 18 months to live, and he's still walking after 3 years. Is it chiropractic? Well, you see, the problem with this is that you've got no absolute control on any one person. The medical neurologist will say, well, anybody can, there's always outliers, or and there's always people who break the mold. But he is still living a life with some quality after 3 years, and he's not alone now, because he's famous and because we got a little bit of publicity, we now have quite a few people. And the really key thing there is we're not treating the disease. We're only treating neurological programs. Now, I would say this is very specific to my technique and its understanding, but I'm interested in what Carrick, I didn't realize, so much of us are so judgmental. I'm talking about three-dimensional torsion, and Carrick talks about three-dimensional torsion, and Dejarnet talks about three-dimensional torsion. And, look at us, we're all so blooming close, and yet we could judge each other in and out of a thing. But through all the work that I've done with very serious, complicated neurological cases, and speaking very much from my own frame of reference, I do think that there is a cranial aspect that is helpful to be addressed, okay? And I also think that cerebrospinal fluid and the movement thereof is really important. Now, believe it or not, if you do a very good series of diversified adjustments, you will free up the meninges, the dura. There is that it will happen. If you do it intentionally, then it's probably even better. And I think it works like this. The reason I know this is because you can have an MND patient, for example, be unable to raise their arms, and then you stimulate cerebrospinal fluid probably most easily through the sacrum because it's the biggest bone, and with a bit of cranial expansion. And all of a sudden they'll be able to, raise up their arms or hold their opposability together just by moving CSF. And what I think happens is if we're in that torsion, or if we're in a state of subluxation, if you don't like that word, maybe the state of dis-ease, or the lack of ease within the system, what happens is the CSF ends up in stasis. Now, CSF is not like a giant river around the spinal cord. The arachnoid matter is very thin, and we only have about 175 mils of CSF at any one time. So that's around our brain and all the way down to our sacrum. So it's a very small amount of fluid. But inside the arachnoid space, so inside the meninges, that CSF has to move. And it is at an optimal concentration, which allows the diffusion of gases and other things from the blood through the blood-brain barrier into central nervous system. Okay. If the CSF ends up being static or having stasis, then all of the crap, in effect, that is supposed to come out of the CNS into the CSF ends up being stagnant. You wouldn't drink from a stagnant pool, would you? So when you stimulate CSF around the brain around the body all the way down to the bottom, what you actually effectively allow is fresh CSF to move, to be against the CNS. Now, what I think happens, so this is hypothetical completely, all right? But I just have, a few thousand adjustments with very severely neurologically complicated people. What I think happens is, in effect, with the new ionic concentration of CSF next to the CNS, all of a sudden that neurology is given a new lease of life. In effect, like you've been breathing your carbon dioxide for a while, and all of a sudden somebody gives you a dose of oxygen. Whoa! And so it's not the oxygen concentration necessarily, but the fresh CSF against the CNS, wherever it is, allows all of the functions of the CNS, of the CSF to happen, which is trophic, which is the trophism of the central nervous system. Is that a complicated word for this? Trophism.
Probably. But we're having fun. And I could listen to you all day.
Well, I love chiropractic. I mean, I think, I think probably sort of give you I think if chiropractors stop shooting inwards on ourselves, and there's one fundamental thing which I'm really, as somebody who likes talking, trying to instill in my life as a discipline, is that I want to listen to hear, not to speak. Now, don't believe me, I don't get it right all the time. But I think too many of us chiropractors are so full of our own opinions about what is right and wrong that we never let anybody else get their message past, sort of just outside the lips before we slap them down as lack of evidence or whatever, And if people like us who are looking at the body in a slightly different way aren't pushing the boundaries all the time, we're never going to grow, because the growth is not coming out of student clinics at the colleges, that is for certain. But a lot of the dogma attached to the profession is coming out of those places. And, that's a real tragedy, because I don't think you necessarily get the best chiropractic in those teaching environments. That doesn't mean the teachers are bad. It's just there's a lot of other things coming to play in there. And there's one more thing I think that is absolutely important. We must keep neurology at the core of what we're doing. If somebody asks you a question, they say, Patrick, what is unique about chiropractic? And you can't answer, then the profession is dead. We've got 50 years, because we'll be absorbed by physiotherapy, which is 25 times bigger than us. In America and places like that, osteopathy is 50 times bigger than us. Anyway, Patrick, I'm going to have to go in a minute. I can hear my door being...
I can 100% understand. And yeah, I just want to kind of back that point with regards to obviously people's opinion on chiropractic. Actually, funny enough, I was mentoring someone, and they asked me for my opinion of what they thought. And I was like, it doesn't really matter what my opinion of what it is that I think is what's true for you. As so long as you're focusing on the core principles of what chiropractic was founded upon, which is the correction of the nervous system. So look, I really appreciate your time.
I love it, and I love talking about chiropractic. So if anybody gives me the opportunity to talk about my absolute favorite subject, I am over the moon.
I know. I've listened to podcasts. I followed you for a while, and you can hear it. You can hear it in your voice, because there's always a glimmer of excitement every time that you talk about it. It was the same when we were at CE and you were adjusting me, and there's a whole crowd around you. And again, like, you can see that passion in what you do, and I'm sure the listeners will have got that from today.
Yeah, that moment at CE, if the ground had ever been able to open, I would have wished it to open up and swallow me.
Really? Why is that? Oh, well, that moment when you were when the guy on the stage was rinsing you.
Yeah, that guy was a guy called Philip McKernan.
And
So I had to bury that. I actually went on one of his courses, which I found fairly amazing. It was one of those things where at that day, I thought I was really clear on my intention in life. I had a vision board and my life was mapped out. But in front of 600 people on the spot, I wasn't clear enough in my vision as to what I thought. And it was a real wake up call for me, because now I'm so clear on what, and as a result, have been so much more successful financially, results. So it was a real moment of my life where my whole life went in a different direction immediately.
amazing. Look, Donald, I'm aware that you've obviously got people waiting for you, so I'm gonna let you run off. It's been such a pleasure to have you on the show with us today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm sure we'll do this again at some point, and we'll catch up again soon. I hope I see you again at CE this year. But that's all. That's all we've got time for today for another episode of Coffee with the Chiropractor. It's your host Patrick Hogg. Thank you, thank you very much, Donald, for coming onto the show with us today, and we'll speak to you guys all again very, very soon. Take care.
Take care, guys. Bye. Thanks.